Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide online divorce mediation and valuation services in St. Louis, Missouri. Today, we will discuss expert witness integrity and neutrality in litigation with Zachary Meyers, a CVA and CPA in Winfield, West Virginia. He's testified and been qualified as an expert in the forensic accounting, taxation, business valuation, pension valuation fields specific to civil, marital, and criminal litigation. So we can present the report in person, online, verbally, or we can present a report. Do you think it's important to make sure that these reports are written? Like when you go to litigation, and some states require reports to be written in certain types of litigation. Some states just have financial schedules and you testify to all of the language that would be in a report. Do you think it's important? Does it matter whether it's written or presented verbally?
Well, first and foremost, you made a great point. Jurisdiction matters because that's the most important thing. The jurisdiction is always going to dictate, the requirements, the form of the report, whether or not, a calculation is even something you need to even talk about. There's some jurisdictions you shouldn't even just joke about the idea. Whether when you talk about an oral report versus a written report, I know like out in California, the cases I've seen, it's like they were super comfortable doing oral reports. Literally, they do them all the time. It's crazy. I personally, full disclosure, I've never done one. And I would think the reason why is because I would feel like I would basically have to write the report to have my case file be sufficient enough for me to capture everything I would have to capture in an oral report. And in the instance that I was, heaven forbid, doing an oral report for a calculation, I mean, that's, and I've had people do that to me. That's very tricky because like you were saying earlier, one of the differences between a calculation and evaluation is that in a calculation, you have to be very clear to say, this is a calculation of value. It's not a conclusion of value. It's less procedures than evaluation. Had I done all the procedures, to reach a conclusion, it could be a materially different number. You have to be very clear and concise about what you are presenting. That this is a calculation. It is not evaluation. It is not a conclusion of value. If you translate that into an oral report, well, then that gets even trickier because if you do an oral valuation compared to an oral calculation, I've seen it firsthand. Those look very similar. And to the untrained eye, and even a judge that's got decades of experience doing divorce, matrimonial disputes, they may not catch the fact that, and it's not really very concise in the standards either. It's kind of like, well, if you don't have a written report, you have an obligation to write that you're doing a calculation, I guess, and that it's not evaluation. But I guess generally, I would assume you would then have to testify to that. But depending on the skill of the expert and how good they are at, massaging or finessing the court, or, you always see the Richard Gere looking expert, like the ones who are just super smooth and like they could literally testify to anything. Sometimes they get away with murder. And, you got to be careful. So I personally wouldn't do, unless I absolutely had to, or the situation or the jurisdiction allowed me to, I wouldn't be all that comfortable with doing an oral anything, like a calculation or evaluation. And in West Virginia, you have to submit the reports way before the trial date or the final hearing date anyway. But even in the states where that's not necessarily the case, I would think that if you're going to go ahead and do all of the work anyways, unless you just really just want to wing it or didn't have time to write it, I would just go ahead and do a written report. I mean, it's going to be probably easier to present, and at the end of the day, documentation saves lives. So even if you do screw something up, you at least have documentation embedded in the report that says how you got from point A to point B to point C, and hopefully in your file as well. You also have documentation that basically, backs that up. And I think that I don't know that I would do an oral report. I know a lot of people out in California, they love to do it. That's like the only way they do it.
Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of states that you can just do the schedules, right? You could just do the financial calculations, but there's no written report to it. So I think you definitely need to gauge your client, I mean, sometimes it comes down to the opposing attorney, the attorney's relationships. We have a lot of clients that will sometimes be like, well, let's see what Melissa's report says first, and then maybe we'll hire somebody. And that's a slippery slope too, so there's some issues with that process. But I think you have to definitely be on the same page because that is additional costs that go into writing that report. And protecting yourself during deposition so that you're prepared and things like that. So I think being upfront with those expenses.